Jacksonville, a child was born who couldn't sit still. 86 years later with no regret. You know that man can't sit still yet. The Great Depression couldn't get him down. He worked for his dad's store in town, collecting money in small amounts. The poor whites and blacks in their furniture accounts. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. As he'd collect, he'd talk to folks. He'd hear legends, tales, songs, and jokes. Now this fine treasure he'd record and write. He was colorblind, didn't see black and white. Writer's project for the WPA. Zora Neale Hurston, he earned his pay. Crackers and blacks, they talked for hours. It was a barefoot history of this land of flowers.
The week that was on the 28th of July 2018, the last program for the month of July as we roar towards August, traditional vacation/holiday month for most Americans. From WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network. We'll look at some of the events of the past week here, and we'll also look at views from Karl Rove, Newt Gingrich being the more traditional conservative type of operator here. So we'll get right on to it. And the reason that we spotlight these particular people is we need to look at what the traditional Republican viewpoint has been and where it's going. Now, one of the interesting factors here, what Newt Gingrich is saying, basically is what a little Paulie Ryan has been saying throughout his speakership, and when he was the chair of the Senate, the House Finance Committee. Basically the same type of Republican/libertarian policies, deregulation, eliminate red tape, the idea of privatizing Social Security, and gutting the federal government. Now, this has not changed. What the Trump people have been able to do is attack the federal workers' unions, various of those, kicking them out of federal buildings. So they've accomplished this, some of it under the radar. But this is a traditional conservative administration. Now, when DJ Trump ran, he was going to drain the swamp. But what he has done is put a dam in the swamp there, and now the waters have risen in the swamp. Yes, Pruitt is gone from the Environmental Protection Agency, but another hyena is there. Nothing has changed there, and if you start looking at his policies, a very unusual situation there. Newt Gingrich, of course, will talk about Trump and his economy, the same as Karl Rove, and where this president is in terms of approval ratings. Now, we have to recall that Barack Obama was reelected with around 42-43% approval rating. It was a different time because the press was pretty much united against Barack Obama, and at the same time the economy that was going along that he brought out of a depression was moving along on key, so to speak, and did, it was 212, 214, achieve the same 4.1% growth. Now, this is for Q2, and one reminder of Q2, you have to look at what Q2 actually was. Q1, January, February, and March. Q2 was April, when those dividend checks, or more or less, tax refund checks. The rest came out there from the massive corporate giveaway to corporations, and some people got an extra $50, and if they were lucky, up to $100 in their paychecks. So that spurred consumer spending. But when we dive a little bit deeper, that spending was augmented by either going into savings or going on credit cards, which some of those credit cards now are delinquent. And these are the things you'll be looking at for Q3. And Q3 will, of course, come out before the November election cycle. If we look at it, let's see, May, June, July, yeah. So we'll be in Q4. So what that basically means is many things can happen between now and then. We'll go first to Newt Gingrich here, and then we'll skip to Karl Rove. And Karl Rove is just basically talking about discussion we had yesterday from the people from the University of Virginia at Charlottesville. Of course, we honor Heather Heyer and her memory, killed by white supremacists. Now, this is a very interesting election. One will note there, when you have an election based on turnout, and Gingrich talks about this, and Rove too, Trump has to get, quote-unquote, his base voters out there. However, the type of election that he has, you have to have a high turnout, at least amongst your supporters. Now, this is a congressional election, not a presidential election, a totally different type of beast. The last presidential election, DJ Trump was able to pull it off with virtually about 80,000 votes in several states, Michigan, Wisconsin, and in Pennsylvania. That is a very hard feat, and almost an impossible feat to repeat, period, providing you have any candidate other than Hillary the Monster Clinton, because the press made it all about her. It's sort of a different take on it in these districts. The Republicans, of course, running commercials against Nancy Pelosi. And at the same time, various candidates running, progressive candidates, moderate candidates, etc., are saying they are open in the race in the event the Democrats do take the House as to whom the next leader will be. And that is something they only get to if they take the House. What if the vote becomes closer and closer? Well, one of the things we understand is the Republicans have been pretty solidly in favor of Trump programs. This is one of the things that they have done, whether they be a Marco Vegas Rubio type, a so-called libertarian like Rand Paul. And they are basically the same. And the reason they're united there is that they are a business party. And that's what you need to remember. The tax cuts were for business and business only. Now they want to craft some sort of privacy policy for the American people that favors the Facebooks of the world, etc. Let's go to Newt Gingrich, and he is writing here. His title is, this is for Fox News on the 27th of July, President Trump's Impossible Economy. Well, it's not an impossible economy when you open up the spigot, so to speak. You deregulate virtually everything in policy, and at the same time you have massive tax cuts, giveaways to the corporations, have a tax cut for individuals that will spur some growth. And then you subsidize farmers, etc., that are hurt. But the wild card here that was not in Q2 is the tariff regime. Now, this takes a while to start to take effect. It's more of a psychological situation here. Let me just start this out. Early in his presidency, DJ Trump said the U.S. gross national product would exceed 3%. The appointed experts at mainstream media claimed such a growth would be more likely to be impossible. Now, that with a big exclamation point, you can achieve that type of growth, but under what circumstances? You're in a modern, industrial, globalized capitalist economy. And when you have these types of numbers, you create inflation. And the Fed will have to raise interest rates. Now, the interest rates that they raise, does it affect the short term? Possibly not. But the analysts look at it, and of course, the long term, you've got great problems. It doesn't matter if you get 4.1%, which they got for Q2, but the problem is Q3, Q4, and 2019. Now, that would affect more of the election. That's where the presidential election. So, in other words, we have short-term strategies here that are only working in the short term, period. And he goes on to talk about the historic Tax Cut and Jobs Act that was passed by the Republican Congress, allowed American families to keep most of their money. Well, the problem is that the American families are keeping most of their money. Who is paying the tax bill? That is a problem. In other words, you're running up deficits. And deficits do matter in the long term. Normally you want to run the deficits up when you're in a depression or a severe recession, but not in normal growth times. Period. This is a big part of our country is becoming twice as productive as on President Obama. Well, that is debatable. That is a statement that is just pure flummery. Productivity is basically stayed about around 60. That's the participation rate, but around 62, 61%. It hasn't risen much, maybe a half percentage point or what have you. So, in other words, it's not what it says, and the casting here of quote-unquote the elites. Well, Newt Gingrich himself's become an elite, and anyone in the Republican Party that's been around would be Karl Rove, but not the talk of elites. But elites was something coined at one time. But when you look at business leaders, etc., those are your true elites. Those are the barons of capitalism. That is the elite system. And in a system where you say, for instance, have the Washington Post, owned by Amazon, one of the most predatory anti-worker organizations in the world. Granted, the Bezos and company do not have their hands on the editorial pen at the editorial page of the Washington Post, but at the same time, people that work there are aware that they're owned by Amazon. And does that have some effect? No doubt about it. And let me just end this here. So they're talking about record levels of unemployment, including the record levels for African Americans and Latinos. Well, Latinos a little different situation there. African American unemployment rates have improved, no doubt about that, but they're still lagging behind in most states. And we'll talk about a state-by-state basis. Let's jump to Uncle Carl. He's writing in the Wall Street Journal. Sobering news for the House GOP is his title on the 26th of July 2018. The savvy crystal ball election prognosticators, led by the University of Virginia's Dr. Larry Sabato. Latest midterm forecast that came out on Tuesday is sobering. The university team there, the crystal ball, increased Democrats' odds at 17 House races, and the first time in this cycle declared Democrats are now a bit better than 50-50 to flip the lower chamber. Well, that's a tenuous situation. If you have a referendum on DJ Trump in many of these districts, particularly the ones that Hillary the Monster Clinton carried. Any wave starts, those Congress types in those districts are dead in the water. But that's the qualification. And his colleagues now rate 34 Republican-held seats as toss-ups, are likely Democrat, and one a safe Democrat. Only 2 Democrat-held seats are labeled as toss-ups, and those both are in Minnesota. The Democrats win the seats their way in just over half of the toss-up races. They take control of the House. The report called last quarter's Democrat fundraising alarming for the Republicans, and that's basically grassroots fundraising. The Republicans are raising their money through PACs, the Koch brothers, etc. 7 of the 8 Republican races are downgraded to toss-ups, were outraised this spring by their opponents, but the report glosses over the fact that all but one of those Republicans still have more cash on hand. Maybe the crystal ball will raise the Republican odds if these Republican candidates outraise their opponents next quarter. And that is something obviously to think about in the cash on hand advantage. But cash on hand doesn't necessarily translate to voters on hand. Still, a report rightly notes that the generic ballot has shown a constant Democratic lead. Republicans are likely to keep the House if the GOP on election day is 3 points or less. They are unlikely to do so if it's 7 points or more. A recent, as of May 31st, Democrats held a 3.2 lead. Now, this is at Real Clear Politics. That's an average on a generic ballot, according to the Real Clear Politics people. The average poll. Now, the Democrats' lead has grown to 7.8. President DJ Trump is in the danger zone. I don't really take that as much. It depends on if he's in the danger zone in those districts. When Sabato's report came out, Republicans were basking in the results of an NBC Wall Street Journal poll released on Monday that showed 88% of Republicans approve of the president's job rating. This is the highest approval rating within his party that Trump has enjoyed since his inauguration. Only G.W. Bush, after September 11, reached a higher level of support amongst Republicans. In a total, 45% of all Republicans, of all voters, approved of Trump's performance. 52% disapproved. These solid numbers overshadow the polls of bad news. His rating, and this is one thing we look at amongst independents, fell to 40%. 58% of independents disapprove of Trump, with 46% strongly disapproving. And in some of these districts, the independent disapproval rate does, in fact, count. These are solid numbers, overshadow the polls of bad news. Trump's approval rating amongst independents fell to 40%. The midterm election can be won with a base only on a strategy. Republicans represent less than a third of the electorate. Their support for the president is already as strong as it can ever be, no doubt about that. Period. The president and political team must turn their attention to independents, especially in swing districts. Now, these are districts, many of these swing districts, suburban districts, places where the Monster Clinton did well. Rural districts who applaud his policies more than his behavior. If his approval rating amongst those voters doesn't increase, Pelosi will be the leader of the House, the Speaker. The economy is critical to the Republicans' prospects for victory. The NBC Wall Street Journal found that 50% of the voters approve of Trump's handling of the economy, while only 34% disapprove. That's interesting. By comparison, 26% approve his handling of the U.S.-Russian relationship, with 51% disapproving. Well, how much will that matter? It'll be interesting if it stays in the news in October. The administration was right to announce that it is nixing a plan for a fall summit with V.I. Putin. This is not a winning issue, but he did promise that next year they'll have this summit, and perhaps DJ Trump would go to Moscow. But that would affect more of the 2020 election, where DJ Trump has said he will run for re-election. We only have to look to see if that will actually happen. It could or it could not happen. Now, this is an interesting case here, a test in Delaware. Can an old-school politician succeed in the campaign season defined by turbulence? Now, this is in Delaware. Thousands of Toby Keith fans walked into the Grand Pavilion at the Delaware State Fair, looking for someone to take their tickets. Old Tom Carper was happy to help. "I'm here at the fair," he joked, a free-term Democrat. That means he's been around 18 years, introducing himself to concert goers. Oh, well. He joked around with a burly tattooed biker. "Hey, didn't I pardon you when I was governor?" He's 71 years old and has ran and won statewide election in Delaware since 1976. Until now, seeking his fourth term in the Senate, he's never faced a Democratic primary challenger and never been accused of being out of step with the party. This year, his number one target of people who helped Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez oust the fourth-ranking Democrat in the House to help challenge Kerry Everett Harris in the September 6th primary. He's being watched closely by the Republicans, who are running as Trump-style outsiders, and who wonder if the Democrats who once ran as a senator for the future may stumble or show his age. The senator who says that a fourth term would probably be his last, no doubt about that. He's 71 years old, and none of his opponents understand what Delaware wants. The core of the Democratic Party in Delaware could be defined by Matthew 25. "I was naked and you clothed me. I was strong and you welcomed me." Carper said in an interview, "We have a moral imperative to help the least in our society, but because we don't have unlimited resources, unlimited money, we have a fiscal imperative to do it in a responsible way." Delaware, with fewer than 1 million people, Joe Biden's state, and just 3 counties, so small that candidates can credibly meet every voter in a party primary. And in recent years, it became a reliable blue state for Carper and for Senator Coons, his fellow Democrat, have come under fire from Republicans, but liberals upset at their relative moderation. Delaware needs a champion who will fight back and not a rubber stamp. That is from the Working Families Party chair, Dan Cantor, whose New York-based group is attacking Carper's with digital ads. Carper's a consistent critic of DJ Trump, had been expected to cruise to a fourth term. His Democratic friends are baffled he's being challenged at all. "I feel the success of Joe Biden has led many people to think that this is a safe blue state," Coons said, referring to the 36-year senator. Democrats barely control the state legislature. Sussex County is deep red. Kent County is purple. Newcastle County is blue. Harris, a community organizer and veteran who is making her first run for any office, has struggled for funds and attention. As of July, Carper's had $3 million for re-election. Harris had just 46,000. The victory of Ocasio-Cortez, who was outgunned financially, challenged the thinking. Harris had her campaign staff drove 3 hours to New York to help the challenger on the final push. Ocasio-Cortez has sent a series of donors and volunteers to help Harris. Harris spent 30 minutes talking to two men who have been passing a joint between them and were intrigued by her support for legalization of marijuana. Lots of the same tactics we used in New York we're using here. That is from Alexander Rejos, who ran the New York Get Out the Vote operation. Not sure if that'll work in Delaware. Karpus has nationalized one of Ocasio-Cortez's issues, the idea that Representative Joe Crowley had become physically out of touch with the people he represented. Two elections, 10 years apart, weighs on the minds of Karpus' opponent. The first was his 2000 run when he challenged a 5-term Republican, Bill Roth. I remember Bill Roth. The 79-year-old senator meandered in the debate, took a camera tumble at one stop. Capper's 2 popular terms as a boom-time governor was outspent by $2 million, won by 12 points. Some people in Delaware felt that Capper's time is up because he appears to be following the footsteps of Bill Roth. The other source of deja vu was the 2010 election that brought Coons to the Republican to the Senate. Republicans draft then Mike Castle, a former governor who supported abortion rights, clashed with Tea Party favorite Christine O'Donnell. Where's old Christine? Those people who failed to show up and vote for Mike Castle were longtime politically aware, politically engaged Republicans who did not believe for a second that someone like Christine O'Donnell would beat him. Coons said that people in my party who think Tom Capers could lose, they remember what happened to Mike Castle. Delaware Republicans who lost every Senate race in the century insist that 2018 could be different, although that is predicted on the ability to run against Harris, who favors a $15 minimum wage, universal health care in a center-left state. Republicans also groomed about attacking about attacking Capers personally in December. The Washington Free Beacon and Clearinghouse for Opposition Research republished part of a 1998 interview while Capers admitted to having slapped his first wife. Well, so what? Anyway, denied the attack when it was first used in a 1982 campaign for Congress. Republicans had gone overboard, accusing him of both spousal and child abuse. After he won, the Republicans never returned to the subject. It's settled. Capers said, well, that'll be a race we'll look at here. Ms. Harris, an African-American, is running here, and there's old Tom Capers running himself. Well, we don't know how that race will turn out. Let me just quickly go here. Facebook's being sued after the stock plummeted. They've wiped out $120 billion of stockholders' wealth. Stockholders not happy about that. They filed suit. James, let's see, Kokarish. They filed suit in Manhattan against Zuckerberg and the financial officer here. Wiesner, making misleading statements about failing to disclose, slowing revenue growth and falling operating margins, and decline in active users. Well, that is the boycott is working. He said 19% plummet in Facebook shares the next day, stemming from a federal security law violation by the defendants. The lawsuit seeks a class action there. Of course, Cambridge Analytics comes in here. Zuckerberg was tied with Warren Buffett for fourth richest person. That doesn't really matter. He's currently at $83 billion. That's Warren Buffett. Zuckerberg is at $66 billion. That really doesn't matter. Facebook shares fell another 0.8% on Friday, closing at $174.89. Well, what's happening here with social media? Very interesting. Facebook, the darling of libertarian capitalism, etc. And all of these Twitter, they had to purge a lot of fake users. And there's two sides of the coin to that. The fake users obviously benefit from their numbers on Twitter, and at the same time, Twitter was using those numbers to boost their total numbers. So it's a two-edged sword there as to how that was working out. Now they have lower overall numbers, and at the same time, the fakes are gone, and more fakes will disappear. And that was the reason they had not, as they say, scraped those or cleansed those or cleared those people off of the site. Now they have been forced to do that. But it's also growth in the EU. The EU has stricter privacy laws, so they can't grow there. And in China, they have to walk the magic rope, or they are out of China very quickly also. And this is the problem with much of the social media, whether it be Facebook or be Google. So DJ Trump to the rescue, coming up with some watered down privacy rules here. Now, will this work? It'll be interesting, because if users fall in North America because of the actions of Facebook, Facebook has got some problems. In other words, they pretty much got the growth now that is obtainable, and thus they have to, as they say, reach out. Period. Now let me move on here. Where are we? The press being ousted. That was during the week. CNN reporter was thrown out of, or banned, or whatever you want to call it, from a Trump news conference. Not the first time. That is Catalina Collin. She was a CNN correspondent, but they decided to not let into a Rose Garden event because they didn't like the question that she asked. And she was also the pool reporter. Oliver Knox, president of the White House Correspondents Association, said the group would challenge any further efforts by Trump to curtail access of reporters who offended him. And according to his press puppet, Sanders, he's the most accessible president in modern history. No doubt about that. Holds a lot of off-cuff press meetings with Fox News. During the campaign, he barred reporters from a dozen media events, including the Post, Politico, BuzzFeed, etc., from being accredited at his rallies, which meant they had to get passes and get in on their own fly commercial. Told Time magazine in 2015 if elected, he would allow news outlets he thought were unfit to him to keep their White House credentials. Some of his favorite targets: Jim Acosta, our own April Ryan. She's the Washington bureau chief for American Urban Radio, and also contributor over at CNN, sort of daylight to make the salary up. But behind closed doors, DJ Trump has ran and raved about these people, period. And in the past instances, top advisors, Sanders and a former communication director who'd been thrown on the bus, Hope Hicks, would have tried to talk Trump out of taking action, according to people that knew about it. but they don't want their names to come out because Trump would be furious about that. But there's also the prevailing Trump rule that any publicity, bad or good, is good for him, and it has happened that way. Reporters routinely ask Trump questions about the news of the day. Many times the president answers, sometimes engages in lengthy back and forth on multiple topics. That's in light of his stream of consciousness campaign. The president obviously isn't afraid of questions. That's from Kellyanne Conway. You don't hear much from her anymore, but occasionally she pops out there. Earlier this month, the Post previously reported Trump grumbled to aides about a question he was asked by an Associated Press reporter, Jonathan Lemire, at his Helsinki conference with V.I. Putin. Lemire asked whether Trump, with the whole world watching, would denounce Russian interference in the election campaign 2016. The president demurred and later complained about the question. In the Wednesday event, we already talked about Collins being the pool reporter, as well. He felt betrayed by Michael Cohen, his former lawyer, who released an audio recording of one of their conversations. She also asked about his invitation to V.I. Putin to visit Washington. Later on CNN, those questions were questions any reporter would ask, and where he talked about in the past. This is what happened to Acosta, who frequently tangled with Trump. In England, Trump snapped at Acosta when he tried to ask a question during a joint conference with the PM Theresa May. I don't take questions from CNN. CNN is fake news. That's what we call a flippable there. Then he called upon a puppet named John Roberts of Fox News, saying, let's go to a real network. Well, that is a flippable. Everybody knows Fox is nothing more than a front for corporate America and the conservative movement in America. Costa replied, well, we're a real network too, sir. Anyway, doesn't do much good with DJ Trump. And this is from the LA Times. Trump taunts economic growth, but it hasn't lifted his support or his party's election possibilities. Is in the this is by Elias Stokas on the 27th of July. Trump celebrated the strong growth numbers released on Friday, appearing in a sun-kissed rose garden to claim a credit for the humming economy. Yet his own numbers for public approval rating remain unusually low, but not unusually low for this time of the year. This time in history, I should say. In paradox his presidency, if you were anybody but DJ Trump, the approved numbers would be astronomical. That is from Peter Hart. A Democratic poster. The disconnect reflects the current political move dominated by a polarizing president focused on pleasing his limited base of supporters on the right, while his prodigious conduct and outright and ongoing scandals, further alienating most Americans regardless of whether they are pleased with his handling of the economy. It makes it hard to predict what message voters may send in November. Well, it will depend on where the economy is. People are not evaluating DJ Trump based on the economy, he added. Now, this is a non-traditional president. This is from Whit Ayers, a Republican consultant and poster. Anyway, they're evaluating him based on his conduct and behavior in office. It appeals to Republicans, and doesn't appeal to independents and Democrats. This is to the Democratic advantage, and we've been talking about this the whole broadcast. The approval ratings is a significant concern to the party, largely because of the coattail effect and non-coattail effect. Threatening headwinds then is a typical for a party in power. For nearly his entire presidency, Trump's approval ratings haven't fluctuated much outside a range of 38 to 44%. It was at 41% on Friday, according to an average by the 538 website statistical analysis. Well, it wasn't very statistical analysis. That was just averaging, which we at Ouija board are very skeptical of. If he did lots more of what he did this morning in taunting the strong economy, it would make it easier for Republicans down ballot candidates to win re-election or to be elected to seats. This is no heirs. This is a very good story to tell. It's a good story to tell unless other things happen, and the economy can be very, very tricky these days. The president is focused on economic, has been focused on economic message this week. He defended his tariffs on Thursday in Iowa and Illinois to his supporters, farmers who had been hurt by retaliatory tariffs imposed by other nations, appearing at a reopened steel plant that's outside of St. Louis, across the river. Trump's week also included picking fights in what he called fake news, including a CNN reporter. But these things are done to literally drown out the opposition in the press coverage day. They're deliberately done. The cacophony of controversy surrounding Trump, Hart said, is what diminishes the impact of positive economic news for voters deciding about the president. Which direction they want the country to go. Bill Clinton got credit for a strong economy, even amidst the Monica Lewinsky scandal. Monica Lewinsky scandal was more of a blown out of proportion scandal, and it was just one scandal. Trump has numerous ones, and new and popping up every day. Trump is penalized because of his personal shortcomings, brash behavior, chaotic way of governing. That's more than anything else there. Bill Clinton didn't have a Twitter to tweet on, as they say. In Iowa, he allotted the right to try a law. That's one where you can try various drugs that have not been approved by the FDA. Yet when he signed the law, it was only 30. He was talking about his pal Roseanne Barr. But again, that is something to get him in the news. And this is one of the things he's been able to do, whether the news is quote-unquote negative or positive. He's out there. The challenge for Republicans is that more we use Trump to motivate our base, we're doing the Democrats' job for them. That's Alex Condon, as Republican consultant, who was a spokesman for Marco Vegas Rubio in the 2016 campaign, according to the Hart survey, for NBC News and the Wall Street Journal. 63% of Democratic voters rate their interest level in the upcoming midterm elections as a 9 or 10, and just 47% of Republicans. But some of these people, one thing to understand, some of these people are Republicans, some of these people are not, and you also have the unknown factor introduced into the election, people that have not voted. And you do have some of these. You always have these types of voters that come out for these so-called populist type candidates. I recall the expansion of voters when we covered the election of Jesse Ventura in Minnesota. But it was a freeway race, a different situation. Ventura went on to destroy the economy. But it was a 4-year ride. It's sort of like the Trump ride, a little bit different there. In the late 2016 polling predicted a Clinton victory. Many campaign observers are putting less stock into numbers. That's especially true of the presidential approval ratings that have come untethered from economic indicators. They may or may not be what faces Republicans come November. Well, that's obviously a factual statement there. You could see an electorate that is personally opposed to Trump, Holmes said, and yet thinks what he's doing on the economy is significantly better for them than what a Democratic congressman might deliver. Well, that's an interesting situation there. That would go to all politics local. We don't really need to get into that. We'll do the California Attorney General waging war against Trump, and these are some about. We'll do it real quick here. Just the environment and public lands. That's one of them. Conflict of interest. More than 30. California's made more than 32 separate requests under the Freedom of Information Act for documents relating to possible conflicts of interest. So then, Scott Pruitt, taxpayers' royalties for oil, coal, and gas. That is with Ryan Zinke from repealing Obama-era regulations. Coal-leasing on public land, lawsuits challenging that. Energy efficient standards, California's been a leader in that for a very long time. Waste prevention rule, California joined 15 other states to force the Interior to implement a rule limiting the release of methane gas there. Ozone reducing standards. And I should say when this was. This was in April of 2017. Scott Pruitt there. And this is all transportation fuel efficiency standard. They have greenhouse gas emissions on highways September 20th, 2017. Fracking regulations. This was in January of 2018. Sued the Bureau of Land Management to repeal regulations there. Suspension of the Clean Water Act. That was in February of this year. Methane emissions in April. Air pollution policy. National Vehicle Emission Standards. That was in May. And also in May, pesticide safety, air pollution from landfills. In May, healthcare, they joined 19 other states, this is California, to sue to protect cost-sharing reductions in the Affordable Care Act. That was in May. And in October, access to affordable birth care. And Texas LOT, they, with 15 other states, are fighting that lawsuit, immigration and civil rights. That was in March of 2017. And so forth and so on. Nonetheless, to Major League Baseball, Cole Hamels trade from the Texas Rangers to the Cubs is a big item there. The Cubs are trying to get what they can, and at the same time, the Twins are offloading everything they can offload. Cleveland was in the Motor City. 8-3 was 8-3 was the final score. Cleveland over the Tigers. The Rays were in Camden Yard. Orioles 15-5. The Mets were at the Pirates in Pittsburgh. Pirates pulled that one out for 5-4. And in 10, the Twins were in Fenway Park. 4-3 was the score there. Sox over the Twins. The Phillies and Reds in Cincy. Reds 6-4. The Nationals and Marlins, in Florida. It was all Nationals 9-1. Nationals, I guess, are winning again. The Dodgers and Brewers, they drove old Dixie down 4-1. Dodgers over the Brewers. Mr. Kershaw was the winner there. And the loser, I won't even try to pronounce his name, Mr. Jensen got the Jansen, got the save. I don't know why I always call him Jensen. Is it Jensen? No, Jansen. Okay. Anyway, Toronto and the White Sox on the south side of Chicago. Blue Jays at 10-5. The Rangers and Astros in Houston. The Rangers finally won a game. This is Texas rivalry, 11-2. The Cubs and Cardinals in St. Louis. It was Cardinals 5-2. Mike Montgomery was a loser there. Oh well. That's been a series moving from Wrigley Field. Now it is in St. Louis. We'll have to tune into that game. Our old friend Mike Shannon there, one of my favorite broadcasters, broadcasts Cardinals home games only. He's in his late 70s. The Athletics and Rockies in the Mile High City. Rockies 3-1. And in 10, the Mariners were in California, and the Angels are 4-3. Close game there. The D-backs and Padres down in San Diego. It was D-backs 6-2. That race out in the West It's still out there, and we'll review that on the Monday Morning Quarterback. The Brewers and Giants in San Francisco. The Brewers kept the Giants in the cellar 3-1 over the Giants. Mr. Bumgarner took the loss there. Mr. Kimball got the save. And finally, postponed. I guess rain got them. The Royals were in New York. Royals Yankees postponed. More makeup to come there. This will end this week, the week that was, on the 28th of July 2018 over the Boston Red Network. Incidentally, a programming note. Hopefully we'll pull this off the week coming up. We'll actually do a talk show over on Blog Talk. It'll be about 30 minutes, a little over that, where we'll accept calls. We'll put the subject up there. I'm not really certain about what it'll be. Maybe we'll do it on the Trump economy. Maybe we'll do it on DJ Trump. And perhaps we'll do it on something else. But we'll have one fundamental question that people can call in and make their comments. Keep it civil, or we'll cut their ass off. And we'll do future ones as long as that option is open over there. We'll do. Hopefully, our target is maybe Tuesday morning or maybe Thursday morning of next week, or it would be Wednesday night, whatever you want to do. I want to say it'll be. I'm not sure about what time it'll be. Probably so we can get people on the East Coast. Probably midnight Eastern time, perhaps. And on the West Coast, that would put people in, let's see, around 9 o'clock, something like that on the West. Anyway, in the Mountain time zone, let's see, where would we be there? Around 10 and 11 in the Central. Anyway, all these time zones there. We'll incidentally have the Monday Morning Quarterback, as we naturally do. And we'll have This Week in Economics. We'll talk about the 4.1 GDP. And I don't know if we'll have a special Sunday program or not. That's an editorial thing. We'll figure it out. Have a good weekend, everyone. Good day.